Good evening, Malaysia and followers from around the world. It is no longer news that our planet is sick. It needs help quickly, and we are running out of time. Climate change, protecting the environment, and sustainability now permeates through every sphere of life. All other things are no longer as urgent as preserving our planet. We all know how the climate has impacted on all of us. In some cases, it's much more immediate and serious than others, but eventually we would. For the millennials, climate awareness is taken much more seriously. It is a burning concern among Gen Z. To put it simply, the analog generation has knowingly screwed it up. As Greta Thunberg said, our house is on fire. Joining us tonight is Dr Jemilah Mahmood, who is now the Executive Director of the Sunway Centre for Planetary Health. Planet needs help, and it needs to be taken much more seriously. Now, Tan Sri, for the past 2 years, as the then health advisor to the Prime Minister, Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin, you were one of the faces for fighting the COVID-19 pandemic. You have now taken a new platform. Tell us about your new role and how it came upon.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wong. Thank you very much for inviting me, and good evening to everyone on the show. Well, even before I took on the role with the Prime Minister, my primary aim coming home was actually to set up a planetary health center somewhere in Asia. The reason is this: I have been witness to more than 2 decades of suffering, whether it's in conflicts or crises or pandemics, and all the time as a person working in the humanitarian and development sector, we're constantly responding to these crises. But the underlying causes are often overlooked and sometimes not paid attention to. So in 2015, the Lancet Commission came up with the concept of planetary health and an approach that looks that you cannot have health among human beings without the health of the planet. And the COVID-19, it was just coincidence that as I was toying into a new foray, the pandemic happened. And we know that COVID-19 didn't happen out of the blue. It was because, mankind has violated the planetary boundaries, has damaged the environment, has allowed zoonotic diseases to break into, our own homes and our own environments. And therefore, it made it even more urgent that the Planetary Health Center is established. And that's why I'm where I am today.
Tan Sri, the Center for Planetary Health, which is the first in Malaysia, is housed at the University of Sunway. Why was this particular university, this university chosen? Why did they come up with the initiative and not from the public universities?
Okay, so the Planetary Health Center, let me tell you why we want to establish it, right? First of all, it's got a few reasons. One is we've got to increase knowledge and research in the area of planetary health. So it really requires an academic base, if you like, and a home in a university. The second is the whole engagement and advocacy and policy change. A lot of the times universities do research, but we don't know what the impact of that research is. It sits somewhere on a file, it's cited, but what is the impact of your research to people's lives? Now, to be very honest, I was approached by another country in the region to set it up. And it does require an investment to set up a planetary health center. But I also wanted a university that would commit that not only the center is set up there, but the whole university will reorient all its learning, all its schools in the university towards a planetary health approach, which means that whether you're doing engineering or actuarial science or economics or arts, you need to put a planetary health lens onto how you teach students. So it happened with, in a casual conversation with Tan Sri Jeffrey Chia, and he didn't want me to leave Malaysia again. So he said, how about coming to Sunway? What will it take to set it up? So I designed a whole work plan. Mind you, this has been going on for a year. And he said, okay, he was willing to commit. More importantly, he was willing to commit the school, the university, to embrace planetary health as the platform and the foundation of all education for its students. Now, this is a tremendous opportunity. You've seen the activism from young people in COP26. And if we can get the young generation, our future leaders, to really understand how much damage we as human beings are doing to the planet, then I think there is hope for the future. So it was really just a matter of timing. It was a matter of the right meeting with the right person. So I didn't have to leave the country again. And planetary health centers, there are very few. There is one in the London School for Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. In Asia, I believe we are the first dedicated planetary health center. In fact, one of the first in the world, to be honest. And the other ambition that I had was that we cannot rely only on Western education. I think that Asia Pacific is the supermarket of everything. Disasters, pandemics, it all starts here mainly. And the impact of climate change is so profound in this region. We should be teaching the rest of the world, our experience. We should be documenting the research from here. And there needs to be, much more focus on the region, learning from each other as well.
I'm glad that you're staying back in Malaysia because you have been away for too long. Okay,
I know.
And Tan Sri Jeffrey Chia is really committed to sustainable development.
Yes.
He has been on this for such a long time. A man who's really committed and passionate about this. Now, I just want to talk about this deforestation. Okay, the environment issue in Malaysia, it does not generate as much emotions and enthusiasm if compared to countries in the West. I don't know whether I'm right or wrong. Is this a general perspective? We talk about the melting ice in Antarctica, and we think that it does not affect us immediate. If you look at the recent parliament meetings, there was really almost no discussion on the environment and climate change. Although the world is talking about this, we seems to be more engrossed in Timah, engrossed in Siakap, and other issues. What is your view on this?
Well, I always look at things as a glass half full. Let's say that, for the first time, we're seeing in our 12th Malaysia plan mention on sustainability, on environment. The budget has also, taken this into consideration. We engage very, very strongly with EPU, with CASA and others, and planetary health is mentioned 7 times in the 12th Malaysia plan. So I think that there is an awakening. Is it enough? I think it's still early days. I think that COP26, at least we've committed now to the deforestation agenda and methane production. So that's good. Where we haven't progressed is some of the more political issues, right? Like hydrocarbons and so on and so forth. So like you, I feel quite frustrated that, we didn't push harder, but as I said, we already have the language in there. What we need to do is make sure that that language and that commitment is actually put into action. And I think we need to hold the relevant stakeholders accountable to that.
Are you optimistic with the pledges and the promises made by world leaders at the COP26? Because in the words of Greta Thunberg, she says that it's the tsunami of greenwashing outcome with words like good, progress, and hopeful, but she's very pessimistic. What is your view on this?
I think that, I'm a big fan of Greta Thunberg. Her activism has ignited the world, and whether you like her or not, for the first time, people are actually putting attention on climate crisis, which is already upon us. Will this be something that turns into action? We have to wait and see. You remember that there was a commitment to 100 billion fund. Indonesia, for example, was part of the supposed to be a benefactor of the REDD from Norway, and then that didn't materialize. And kudos to Pak Jokowi, who just said, I've had enough, and that's it, right? We will try and do things on our own. Now, I think we need to hold our leaders accountable. I think it's no point saying that it's all blah, blah, blah. You guys make all these commitments and nothing happens. So where is that framework for us to hold them accountable? I still think it's the youth, because
Yes.
You know, at the end of the day, leaders, politicians will want to know where their votes go. And I think that young people today are very vocal about it. You see the corporate sector also moving quite fast on this. There are great corporate leaders, Paul Pullman and others, who are really rallying other corporates together. And the Earth Fund and all that. These are real, tangible things that are being developed by the corporate sector. So I feel a little hopeful that, whether we like it or not, the corporate sector does drive a lot of the economic activities in countries. But countries like ours, it's SME, and SME probably are not as strong as the larger corporate sector. Yeah. But I do know that Bursa, for example, is very serious about the ESG and so forth. So we've just got to keep pushing. And one of the outcomes of this COP26 is a strong call that there will be a commitment that is strengthened in COP27, which is in a year. So, like you, I don't like bureaucratic talk shows, and I want to see action on the ground. I think we need to hold our leaders accountable.
Tan Sri, as in the previous commitments, okay, when the leaders goes back home, they find that it's sometimes difficult to implement what they promise.
Yeah.
To put taxation on use of fossil fuel, and to commit and there's rebel, there's protest against any form of taxation. If the taxpayers and their voters don't like it, and sometimes they get bundled into this kind of situation. Sometimes it's easier said than done. But you mentioned about Bursa pushing that. I think it's true. It's really great. Because in most publicly listed company, the ESG, environmental, social, and governance requirement is very strong in Malaysia.
Yeah.
And everybody has just got to do it, whether you like it or not.
And also Bank Negara, right? Bank Negara is also quite firm in the sense that if there are going to be loans given out, that you need to check the background of the companies that you're giving the loans on. So I think those are, there are some steps being made, and I think we've got to encourage it. We've got to keep, supporting these agencies to do the right things, right? These institutions. But I want to go back to one thing you mentioned about tax. We Malaysians do everything, and I'm not saying everyone, but many Malaysians will do everything that they can to try and evade tax, right?
Pay less tax.
Less tax. We hire tax consultants to advise us how. Whereas, I've worked abroad, right? I worked in Switzerland, the US, and Europe, and all that. But, there is no question mark, but you pay a lot of tax. But your services are guaranteed, right? Your social protection is there. So how do we move towards this kind of approach that, you have a tax system that's fair? I think we need to be fair. But the other thing is, beyond all that, it's about consumption. Yes. The state of the world today is because of us, because of our own consumption patterns. Now look at 11/11 sale. Alibaba and the rest are going to make billions on that day, because many of us will be buying things that we probably don't even need and will end in the landfill. Look at the amount of wastage of food that is purchased, and how much goes to the landfill. So there are a couple of things that are really crucial for us to address that actually increase our CO2 levels. One is obviously transportation. This is the biggest problem. But how many of us are willing to say that we don't want to buy a guzzling car? I've been trying to buy an electric car for a year now, and it's impossible. So now with the new, tax breaks and this whole discussion around no taxation, no road tax for electric vehicles, great. Geely is one of the biggest, electric car manufacturers in China. They're running Proton. Why are we not having electric vehicles here? Because are we protecting our petroleum industry, right? Or what is happening now that we are giving so much fuel subsidies and so forth? So unless we demand it at individual level, we want to consume less. We want to be much more careful in what we eat, and so on and so forth. And that's not going to help if you don't want to change your behaviors, but you want the government to do all sorts of things.
Yes, I agree. Some form of consumption tax is necessary. Whatever you call it, it may not be 6%. It should be less than that. but some kind of tax net is necessary to reduce the unnecessary consumption. People buy a lot of stuff on online now, and then they come in these packages in plastics, in all kinds of wrapping. It's like it doesn't make sense.
Yep. Yeah. And I want to come back to this whole issue around planetary health. Okay, it's about our environment and so forth, but there are also other things. For example, how we do our agriculture, right? I stopped taking meat. I think I told you this before. I completely stopped taking meat because I want to be responsible. I do not want to increase my carbon footprint. Animals that we eat, like chicken, for example, in mass production, and a lot of the meat that we eat, or chicken or other things, these animals are consuming antibiotics. Now, one of the biggest problems we're going to be facing is antimicrobial resistance, because these little antibiotics are going into our blood circulation. So at one point, we may be actually resistant to antibiotics when we need it. Now, this is estimated to cause 10 million deaths by 2050, antimicrobial resistance. This is a big problem, not just COVID-19. Air pollution. Air pollution has killed 7 million people. There's a classic, landmark case of Rosamond in UK. And she's an British African person who lost her daughter to a very severe asthmatic attack. And she fought so hard, the NHS and all the legal frameworks, and she succeeded in getting the cause of death on her child's birth certificate as air pollution. So it's a landmark case to really highlight that there are things that are happening around us that are killing us. So, and our young children now will be already so exposed to pollutants in the air that, they will develop allergies and respiratory illnesses and so on and so forth. And also because of the pesticides and all sorts of things that are actually going on to your vegetables.
Tan Sri, when we talk about health, the average guy will just think of hospitals and clinics and some kind of diseases that they have got themselves infected, but they would never link it with the planet, with the environment change and so forth. How would you try to advocate this to tell Malaysians that, look, what happens to the earth, what happens to the climate does have a direct impact on you, to your health? Do even doctors buy this kind of line? Are they even convinced?
Yeah, so that's a really important point. I'm really glad you asked me, because the determinants of health, when you talk about health, you envision the hospital, the clinic, the doctor in the white coat, right?
Yeah.
The determinants of health, only 20% of health is from that medical care complex. 80% of health is outside of that. So the bulk of health is created by environment and social factors, behaviors, and only 5% is genetic. So let me give you an example. I mentioned about air pollution causing respiratory illness, the heat waves that will cause sunstrokes, all sorts of other diseases as a result of climate change. The rise in dengue, for example, the return of malaria. These are real possibilities. Now, on top of that, there's also the social changes. Now, COVID-19 has, as you know, been called the great equalizer, right? But it's also stripped bare for us that the most vulnerable are those who are suffering social inequities, right? Inequalities. Yes. So that, if you're in a low socioeconomic status, you're probably malnourished or you have micronutrient deficiency. And a lot of our kids have micronutrient deficiency because maybe they're not eating the right nutrients. And also as a result of climate change, for example, the rice we're eating now has less nutrients than before. So it's just carbohydrates. So there's a lot of challenges that we are not seeing and speaking enough because clinical doctors, unfortunately, only focus on that. And planetary health is a fairly new concept. Now, the other thing, of course, is lifestyle and behaviors. If you don't take enough exercise and you don't create a conducive enough environment to say that, why can't we build proper bicycle lanes, put lots of trees around us, whatever, then we can actually cycle to work, have proper showers at office, and and most importantly, is improve our public transport so that people will actually take public transport to work. Why is it that when we go to the UK, we're ready to take the tube and the bus, and you come to Malaysia and you all have to have, every one of us has to have a car. So I think these things are important, because the rise in non-communicable diseases, we are the most obese country in the world, in this region at least. We have 1 in 4 people with hypertension. These are all, because of poor lifestyles. So Planetary Health is about addressing all this, that health does not only belong to a healthcare complex, and you need to address all facets of the determinants of health if we're going to have a healthy nation and a healthy world.
Tan Sri, the past 2 years of the pandemic outbreak obviously has not been good for most countries, but on the other hand, it is the kind of a wake-up call as far as nature is concerned. In many circumstances that actually environment has improved. Which can you share with us some of the what you have seen or heard?
Yeah, I think we know for sure the indicators is the air pollution indicators really dropped, right? I mean, the world became cleaner. I know if you remember during MCO, suddenly the skies were blue and we could see, it was really wonderful in that sense, right? The air felt cleaner. So as we recover from COVID-19 and the pandemic, we have to make sure that our recovery is also one that will protect the environment and be sustainable. So I think I'm very concerned that we will have this massive backlash that, everybody now wants to travel, everybody wants to go around. People have been cooped up for so long, right? That we may run a real risk that we will now, whatever we have gained in terms of, our air pollution indicators, our CO2 emissions and so forth, which has really dropped during the lockdown, will now have a rebound. So I think to be more conscious of that, and therefore, our policies at government level on, whether we look at, restricted zones for transport, but critically to improve our public transport, to be more, non-ICE sort of vehicles, buses and so forth.
We have failed in 2 areas. One, of course, is public transport. We have failed miserably. And number 2 is that we have not pushed hard enough for electrical vehicles. You travel a lot. I travel a lot. I go to China. I mean, China has done marvelously well as far as providing electrical vehicles. Almost everybody is on an e-bike or an e-scooter. We have this situation in Malaysia, which has been really frustrating, because I keep on asking this question over and over again. It is almost banned in Malaysia, e-scooters and e-bikes. Because it is the most environmental friendly, but it is banned in Malaysia because it is regarded as dangerous for road use, as there is no insurance protection. So here the word is no insurance protection. And in my mind, I get this feeling that the insurance lobbyists are putting a brake to it, okay, until they get their share. But the government is seeking changes to the Road Transport Bill 2020. And awaiting approval at the Senate. Well, I hope that it really happens, because it's taken too long. I don't know. I mean, like we could have all this in shopping complex, in roads, in housing estates. There must be some kind of requirement by the councils that look, there must be proper depot for you to charge your electric car. But I don't see this happening.
So 2 things. I think first of all, we need to have the end-to-end solution, right? You don't just have electric vehicles or electric scooters and bikes when you're going to get killed on the road, right? Let's be honest, the way people drive, there's no dedicated bicycle lane. In countries that have developed this, there is an awareness, and also, do we ever see our leaders going on a bicycle, right? The King of Norway rides a bicycle. The Prime Minister of Netherlands rides a bicycle to work. So it's second nature to them, right? So I think unless we build the infrastructure that will allow for us to take these, low carbon vehicles to work, or even for leisure and so forth, and that's one that's needed. The second is, when you have that infrastructure, then you can have the other vehicles. But why are we stopping people from having this to be used in their housing estate, or somewhere safe? I cycle on weekends. I go to Putrajaya and I cycle, or in town when they don't have any cars, because I'm not a great cyclist. So, so I think, but we need to create more of these opportunities for others. And I think, remember when we had those bicycles that you can rent, people damaged them. So how do you educate people that this is public property and you don't damage these bicycles, because it could be really something very important for people to use, right? So I think, education is key, Dr. Wong. This is why I mentioned earlier that unless and until there is a generation that demands these, then things will not change. So it must be, beginning from a younger generation. In Sunway, for example, Planetary Health is now a compulsory module for all students, not only to study planetary health as a module, but also to apply it to the community. So this is what I get excited about. The real opportunities for us to create impact through influence of, the younger generation. And I think it does require political will, whether we like it or not. If there's strong political will that we are going to be embracing sustainability and planetary health, then things will happen. Otherwise, it won't.
I'd like to share with you a story of countries with 4 seasons. Okay, I've got a friend. I was going to Norway and Finland quite a bit, and of course I made friends. We kept in touch. Over the last 3 to 4 years, the snow has been slow in coming down. Okay, so for those in the hotel industry, they could not promise the visitors whether there'll be snow in October or November. So there have been cases where until November there was just not enough snow for skiing, and it hurt them very badly. But this year has been much better. But for the last few years, it has been quite tough. So it hits them directly. Of course, you have mentioned about Kiribati, an island in the Central Pacific Ocean. Can you share with our viewers on this?
Yeah, Kiribati. It's pronounced Kiribati. So this is probably Kiribati, Tuvalu will be islands that will not exist anymore because the level of sea rise is really high. Now, they have even bought land in Fiji and to start moving their artifacts. In other words, they're moving their history to a foreign land because they will have to be what we call climate migrants. And I think that, they will not be the only one. Look around us, even some islands in Malaysia, as well as Indonesia, Bangladesh, and some parts of Bangladesh, the Sundarbans and so forth, they will all be immersed in water. There's been a very interesting study that the World Wildlife Fund has looked at our coastal areas, and the west coast of West Malaysia is going to be very severely impacted. That by 2050, we will have a lot of our towns underwater, including your beloved Penang.
20 what, sorry?
By 2050, yeah.
Okay.
So
it's not too long.
Not too long. And I can share the graph with you. But these are realities. Until and unless we start really seriously looking at the global warming and the climate change issues are real. We are like frogs boiling in the water slowly because we are living in a tropical country, right? So sometimes the fluctuations 1, 2, 3 degrees, you don't quite feel it. But there are days I know I feel it's really, really hot, and there's some I feel really cold. And this is classic of climate change, right? It's not just about getting warmer, also it's about erratic weather. And the winds that we're experiencing nowadays, the rains that we're experiencing, how heavy they are, how fast they fall, and it's causing a lot of challenges. So the flash floods we're going to get as we also have urban development. Now, in planetary health, the area that the center is working on, we are looking at 5 areas. One, we're looking at preventing the next pandemic, and that is about how do we do research and influence behavioral change. COVID is just a dress rehearsal, right? But the other thing that we are working on is really working with international partners on a potential legal instrument, or sort of a pandemic treaty, because the international humanitarian regulations, so IHR and WHO, only look at the issues around response, right? What do you do when you prepare and you respond? But it doesn't have, the very important areas around compliance and accountability. So had we had some kind of treaty, then it would have been the obligation of countries to actually say we have this terrible virus that's leaking out. And if the whole world, for example, had locked down in the early days, hindsight, so it's 2020. But say, for example, when it first broke out, and we were all held accountable, and member states actually told us the truth about what was going on, then we could have had a global lockdown for maybe 2 weeks to 4 weeks, and then the virus would have had no way to escape and go everywhere else. So these are the kind of things that we're negotiating now at the World Health Assembly. So, there are member states now very determined to actually look at the legal instruments. And as you can see, the cases are rising again, and we shouldn't be too alarmed, because this is bound to happen, because it has, it's around us. So we need to get our boosters, we need to get our vaccines, but not panic every time the cases rise and so forth. The second area is about tackling climate change, because it's all interrelated. Climate change is also interrelated to zoonotic diseases and other things like that, but also the damage that it causes to lives and health. And the third thing is looking at, urbanization. How do you build healthier cities? Because by 2050, 70% of people in this world, 8 billion people or more by 2050, will be living in cities. So until and unless we ensure that these cities are livable, are healthy, that embrace this whole concept of planetary health, then we're going to be in more trouble by then. The fourth area is looking at food systems. I mentioned earlier about, not just about availability of food, but also the food systems that we have, because we will have a lot of food waste, a lot of things that will also increase. So it's a vicious circle. You keep getting food being wasted, food being produced, not enough food being available to some countries, and then, putting more pressure on the planet. And the fifth area is around fair economies. Are we looking at economy in a just and fair way? The GDP model is questionable. If you are familiar with circular economies, but also look at Kate Raworth's donut economic model, she puts the case that your economic model of the future must be one that protects your planetary boundaries, when there are 9 planetary boundaries, and then make sure that your social ceiling is also stable. Otherwise, people will fall into the hole in the middle of the donut. So are we ready to embrace new models of economics that will actually look at fairer economies and a much more just economy as well?
Yeah. Actually, I'm going to talk about 2 important subjects here, because you mentioned about food. Obviously, food security is really very important now, and that Malaysia spends billions on food.
Yeah.
It seems to import almost everything. I go to the supermarket and I find that even the chili padi is from Thailand.
Yes.
And I was wondering, why are we importing chili padi from Thailand, and that Chinese cabbage is from China, and almost everything else is from everywhere except Malaysia. And a lot of countries, even a tiny country like Singapore, they really put a lot of serious attention, because at some point we will be fighting over food. The second thing is, of course, water. We treat our water supply very, very badly. If you look at our rivers, we have workshops that is located next to a river. You wonder why, and this has been going on for years, and we forget very easily. We get only very angry when our water supply is disrupted. So water and food security, can you talk about this?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. We are food insecure in Malaysia. While we should be secure, we are importing billions of food products, vegetables, everything, from countries around our region and beyond. So this must change. So this whole focus on agriculture, again, sustainable agriculture, is going to be very important. And this again requires political will, right? A real shift,
absolutely, a lot.
Agricultural, and self-sufficiency, or at least minimal importation. But for those of us who live in homes that can grow vegetables, we grow. I mean, I grow my own vegetables. I don't need to buy.
Yes.
So that's one way. And there's a lot of fantastic initiatives being done. There's so much abandoned land, right, in housing estates and so forth, that it's one way you bring communities together to grow their own food, but also to build, inter-community relationships. I think we should use it as this opportunity to build relationships among our neighbors and so on and so forth. So that decision on Malaysia refocusing on agriculture is going to be very important. Now, the other thing, of course, is about food wastage. A lot of the food goes to waste because it's not consumed. So I think it's about our consumption behaviors and how we behave. But the second thing is, if you like, how do we make ugly fruit fashionable, right? So, in Japan, in UK and others, you have this concept of ugly fruit, but where maybe the cucumber is not so perfect, or whatever, and it's sold at a cheaper price, basically to prevent food from going to the landfill. And even if you can take this food and make sure that people who have lack of food, right, the B40, that can get this rather than to be sent to the landfill. So there are great organizations like Lost Food Project and other that they're doing this. So I think we need to relook at the entire food system. It's not just food security, it's also the food systems. The second area is around water. Now, again, this is very, very political. Rivers don't belong to the federal, they belong to states. The minute it goes into the pipe, it goes to your house, then it becomes federal. So I think that, again, how do we make sure that state leadership also buys into the fact that they also need to be held accountable for the environment? So when the government signed on the deforestation, I actually asked someone, so how do you make sure that the states don't chop all the trees? Because the land use is by state. So that conversation needs to be had, right, between state and federal, that the protection of the environment, protection of water is going to be there. And you rightly put, why would you put, there should be a ban on any industries along river banks.
Yeah.
Because how many Sungai Kim Kim episodes are you going to get? It's like a recurring thing. Yeah. How many times do we have to have, CASA rushing to the scene of a river that has chemicals pouring into it, right? So, and when will the public be angry? Yeah. Why are we so nonchalant about this? We should be very upset that this is happening, because I don't have grandchildren, but if I did, even if I didn't, I'm so worried about kids. What kind of water are they drinking nowadays? What kind of vegetables are they eating? So why are we not enraged that we are not giving the best to our citizens in terms of the quality of food and water that they're receiving?
There is now a report of a cholera case in Selangor.
Yes.
It had disappeared long ago. I mean, we could just drink water from the pipe, okay? Yep. And it's back to cholera again. We never imagined that this would happen, but the quality of water has dropped tremendously. Sometimes you can even smell it, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
okay.
Cholera is definitely waterborne. And foodborne. So, it also tells you about the state of hygiene, right? So I think these are the things that, we should be worried about. And it, again, I link it back to human behaviors. Remember the determinants of health that I mentioned earlier. You can have the best hospitals, but people don't behave. COVID-19 is a classic case, right? Yes. We had the vaccine, we had hospitals, we have fantastic healthcare workers. But if people don't want to get a vaccine, people don't want to wear a mask or have social distancing, then you're asking for trouble.
Yeah. To put it simply, if we do not fix and save the planet now, especially in Malaysia, then the bills and the burdens will just keep on increasing. The small investment will eventually become very, very big, and we are unable to handle it.
There's been a really interesting study on COVID-19, and it's estimated about 13 trillion were lost as a result of the pandemic, right, until 2020. And the cost of preventing a pandemic spread over 10 years is only 260 billion. So we're not willing to make that investment, which is a fraction of the loss in a year, because we don't have that long-term vision, that investment in preparedness, in all the things that I mentioned earlier about protecting the environment, making sure that we have there's social justice, right? That there will not be these pockets of inequality, vaccine equity, all these things which are so important. They are all determinants of health.
That's one final question. A lot of Malaysians would ask this question. Malaysia is just a small country, and that compared to the other 200 world countries, may be bigger than us. What can we do, and what should we do to make a difference?
I think that everyone, it starts at the individual level, right? Make a list on what is it that you can do to reduce your carbon footprint. What is it that you can do to ensure that you protect the environment? What is it that you can do to make sure that you live a healthy lifestyle? I think these are things we can do at the individual level. What is your influence, your community, your family, and so forth? And what are your demands from the government? I think, we have a democracy, right? We need to be able to voice that. I think that whether, we like it or not, politicians will want to know, will want to have that X next to their name at any elections. We, the rakyat, have to make it very clear to them what we want. And I think, you know, this is why the investment in young people is the way forward.
Thank you, Tan Sri Jamila, for spending time with us. We appreciate it very much. Malaysians, please like, share, and subscribe to our social media. And please click the subscribers button for RealChunWai. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.